Hello everyone, this is Monica Maid, and my video DPA Secrets Revealed is going to show you exactly how to use DPA for creative down payment assistance, okay? Now you may have already watched my other DPA video. This one's going to be slightly different because in addition to me discussing what DPA really is, I'm also going to be discussing with you exactly how to use it with the most latest creative financing method through a different loan program that's just been offered, okay? So I want you to painstakingly go through this with me just to fully understand exactly how DPA works first before I reveal to you the new loan program that's now available to you. Now, what is DPA? DPA actually stands for down payment assistance, but it's an unofficial term that's no longer used in real estate. So if you call up a bunch of companies asking about DPA, they're either going to tell you that they don't know what you're talking about, or they're going to tell you that they don't do those types of transactions. So you can't really use the term DPA, but I still use it with my students just so that everybody's on the same page and understands exactly what I'm talking about without me having to come up with a full-fledged explanation every single time I'm trying to describe it. So that's a term that I now use and I've adopted, but it's actually not actually used in the real estate world anymore. It used to be a one-stop shop for getting both proof of funds and partial transactional funding for your down payment on your property. So basically what you do is show a lender that you have a cash down payment of say 20 or 25%, and you would actually use a partial transactional funding group or source to be able to inject that cash into escrow, and of course they're paid back right at the close of escrow through either seller carryback or seller actually kicking the money back into escrow for you, or through a buyer's repair credit. So that's how the partial transactional funder is paid back at the close of escrow. It used to be, again, a one-stop shop that both handled getting you the proof of funds, showing you that you actually did legitimately have the cash down payment, and they would actually provide the partial transactional funding to inject into escrow as your down payment. But the problem is that a lot of government regulators started cracking down on these type of one-stop shop organizations. So now the smart investor still uses this as a tool for creative finance. However, what they do is they now have to go through two different processes to do this. They have to go through a proof of funds company that could furnish them with a letter of credit, and they also have to go through a different company that also offers the partial transactional funds or wet funds. So they have to go through two different companies now instead of using only one for DPA. Now a little bit about how DPA works. The financial structure is right now the conventional loan, the max LTV is 80%. It used to be 85%, so it's now 80%. In some states it's actually 65%, such as Florida. But for most states right now it's 80% for the conventional loan. It's a first position loan. And then the 20% would be seller carryback, which means essentially they have to have that at least in equity. So if you're going to be using 20% as a down payment, or saying that you're going to be using 20% as a down payment, that actually has to be in equity, because the property seller is going to be giving that up. Instead of receiving the proceeds from their equity, they're actually going to be giving that back in a buyer's repair credit to make sure that the transactional funder is paid. Okay, so here's how the 20% part works. Now, for example, you're going to be in your offer stating that you are putting a 20% cash down payment down. So basically now that 20% has to be accounted for, and what has to happen is that a transactional funder will be putting the 20% into escrow on the day of your escrow close, and in order for them to get paid back, they're going to be getting paid back with a buyer's repair credit. So instead of you getting any money out of the deal to do any kind of rehab or anything on the property, instead it's going to be going back to the wet funder through escrow instructions. And instead of the seller receiving those proceeds in the form of a check after the close of escrow, as they normally would to receive their equity, instead they would be giving it back to you, or essentially back to the transactional funder in the form of a buyer's repair credit. So that's essentially how that part works. So as you know, the seller must have this in equity, because this particular deal cannot work unless they have at least the 20% in equity, or whatever amount that you're promising as the down payment. They have to have that in equity. The lender cannot know that you're using partial transactional funds or doing any kind of seller carryback on the back end. Okay? Transactional funds are not a loan. A lot of people confuse these and think that they're loans. They're not loans. They're actually wet funds is what they call them. They're paid back at the close of escrow. So essentially the transactional funder is injecting these funds into escrow on the day of escrow close, and they were being paid back at the close of escrow on the same day of closing. So essentially what's happening is the buyer's repair credit that's been authorized by the seller is going back to the transactional funder to pay back the transactional funds that went in. And so essentially what's happening is the buyer's repair credit would have been their proceeds against their equity, and now they're giving it back in the buyer's repair credit. So here are the rules. The terms can be anything on the private mortgage contract as long as you and the seller agree to the terms. And again, this is not something that the lender, the first position lender, knows anything about. The private mortgage contract goes into place before you close escrow. Obviously, you're not going to be talking about what kind of terms you're going to be having on the repayment of the buyer's repair credit funds. After the close of escrow, you definitely want to cover all of that in the beginning. The seller takes second position always. The seller can never take first position on these types of property deals. Never. They could very well place a lien on the property after the close of escrow, but it does not hinder the position of your first position conventional loan in any way. Even if the lien holder finds out about it, say the first position conventional funder finds out that there's a second position or a lien, there's not anything that they can do about it. They're not going to terminate your mortgage, they're not going to foreclose on you, they're not going to do anything if they find out about it. And of course, if you stop making payments to the seller who's holding the private second, the property does not go into foreclosure. You'd obviously want to make sure that you're making payments to the seller, but nothing is going to happen if you don't make any payments. You can make different payment arrangements if you're having financial difficulty on the property. Now, the newest loan program that I have, or rather I should say my money broker has, it's called the 60-30-10. Okay, so we're going to quickly go over this. He can actually handle both loan sizes of under $1 million and over $1 million, so it eliminates all of the issues and problems with dealing with properties that are below $1 million or having to deal with loan sizes above $1 million. So all of that's gone with this particular loan program, okay? So maximum LTV is 60%, which means that 60% of the purchase price, provided that the purchase price is at or below appraised value. There's no occupancy requirement, so no longer do you have to get the 85 or 90% occupancy. There's no occupancy requirements anymore on this particular loan program only. Depending on the loan size will determine your interest, but it's going to be an interest-only loan on both sides. The term on the under $1 million will range between 1 and 3 years. Loans over $1 million will be 3 years. The points will also vary. Obviously, you're going to be possibly paying a lot more in points if your property is under $1 million loan size based on the performance of the property. There's no prepay penalty on either one, and they will offer rehab money on your property. Okay? So this means then that because it's a 60% LTV, if you want the property to go over the $1 million on the loan size, your property the purchase price has to be over $1.67 million. So it has to be at or above $1.67 million to make it a loan size of over $1 million since the LTV is 60%. Okay? So for example, on a $2 million property deal, the seller is going to have 40% in equity to make this deal work. Okay? Because remember, we're doing a 60-30-10. All right? They are allowing for the seller to carry back. A lot of lenders do not allow for seller carryback. This particular situation, this is what makes this loan program so phenomenal, is that they are allowing for seller carryback on this. So basically, they will do 60% LTV. They will allow the seller to carry 30%, which means they have full knowledge of the seller carrying the 30%. But you would have to come up with 10% down, 10% cash down. However, you could still use DPA for the 10%. The lender just can't know about the other 10% being DPA. They can know about the 30% being DPA. Or I'm sorry, the 30% actually being seller carry. So for example, now you have your 60% LTV. So you have on a $2 million property, you have 60%. So that's $1.2 million. That's going to be a first position loan. The rest of it the rest will ultimately be seller carry, which means you have 30%, so you have $600,000 that's going to be seller carry on this particular property deal, but then you need 10% down, 10% cash down, which would be $200,000. If you don't have the $200,000, you could still work the DPA part, but the seller has to have 40% in equity total, because even though he's holding 30% in paper, the other 10% is going to also be held on the private back end as well, because he's going to show that you are going to be putting 10% down. You're going to be using partial transactional funds for that 10%, and therefore he's still going to be holding the other 10% on a private second. It's just that this particular lender is not going to know about it. He's only going to know about the first 30%, okay? So, for example, let's say that we found a property deal on LoopNet, and I've already predetermined a deal for us to look at here because I want us to quickly go through this without having too much of a delay in this. So we have a $15 million property that we're looking at. So we don't know how much equity that they have in this. We're not going to obviously know until we put in our offer. Okay, now the offer is going to show partial seller carryback, unlike a regular DPA transaction. So here we have this particular property deal. It's a $15 million property. So obviously, because of the 60% LTV, they're only going to be funding $9 million of this property transaction. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to show you how you would fill this all in to this particular form that I have, which is my LOI offer form, as you probably already know, and if you're one of my students, you're going to know how this particular LOI offer form works. Okay, so I'm going to show you. I'm not going to fill in the property address or anything because I don't want to waste too much time. You're going to be able to find all this information located on LoopNet. Say, for example, you have your property address, obviously, is going to be on LoopNet. You're going to be able to find your square footage, your acres, and your APN, which is your assessor's parcel number. If you have a premium subscription to LoopNet, which I strongly recommend that you get if you are a serious investor, you're going to be able to scroll down to something called the additional information, view the property record screen. You can actually go in here and find the additional information that I'm telling you about to help fill in your LOI offer forms. And you could actually get the information here. Here's your tax ID APN number. You'd be able to have that here, your lot size, here's your acreage here, the amount of units, building size, square footage, and so you'd have all this information accessible to you to be able to fill in your LOI offer form, which is here. Okay, so you would typically fill in right here what the real estate company is, and maybe the name of the real estate agent that's listed there, and his address and so forth. I'm not going to do this. You always have and/or signs right here, as you know. You always take out the brackets, and so my LLC is Main Investment Group LLC, and/or signs, because when you do formulate when you actually get a property under contract and in escrow, you're going to be changing the name of that LLC into a different LLC for that designated property purchase, and so that's why you always want to have and/or signs so that you could actually have any LLC go into escrow on this property deal. The name of the seller would actually be part of the information that you found on LoopNet, as well as the APN and so forth. And so here we go. Buyer to qualified receiver, first position conventional loan is actually going to be 60% LTV, as we discussed. And you could put it fully amortized over 25 years. You could put all of the stuff in it as a weasel clause to get out of the deal if you don't want to do the deal later. But that's not going to be the terms and conditions of this particular loan. It's actually going to be about 12 or 14% interest, depending on the loan size. And for this, it'd probably be 12% interest only. You're going to be putting it's actually going to be you're going to be putting a clause in here, or a requirement in here on the terms, to whereas seller to provide second for 30% of the property purchase, buyer to provide a 10% cash down. Okay, so that's essentially how it would look. Now you're probably wondering, how am I going to get the 20 or 10% cash down if I don't have the cash? Because on a $15 million property deal, that's $1.5 million cash, and you may not have that, obviously. And so this is where you do your DPA type of structure. Okay. Again, this is exactly how you do it for an 80-20 deal, except this is a little different because these lenders are allowing for the 30% to be held as a private mortgage second from the seller. So then you have it listed here as such. You go over to this side over here, and we're looking at page 2, or under you have seller obligation. Okay. So, seller to provide all documentation, blah, blah, blah. Will also pay for any back taxes, fines, unpaid utilities, mechanics liens, any of the other such. And so, seller to approve a buyer's repair credit for post-property repairs rehab not to exceed, and it's going to be that figure that you need for your down payment, which is going to be the $1.5 million. So, you want to give yourself some breathing room, so you want to put maybe $1.75 million. Oops. Okay. And so that will allow for the down payment for the 10%. This is the part that the transactional funder will provide, as well as the proof of funds source will provide that you have this in document. So basically, if you need your $1.5 million down payment to be proven that you actually have that, then you'll have a proof of funds company give you a letter of credit showing that you have $1.5 million to put down on the property. And then what you'll do is you'll have the partial transactional funder inject that money into the close of escrow, and then they'll be paid back through this buyer's repair credit from the proceeds of the seller's equity. Now, this is, of course, assuming that the seller has 40% equity, because obviously, going back here, he's going to be offering up 30% on a private mortgage contract, and then the 10% is actually going to be also held on a private mortgage contract as well, except that the lender's not going to know about it. I need to make this very clear over and over again, and I've done this in the last video I did on DPA, is that when you talk to my money broker about this type of transaction, he cannot know that you are using DPA or doing a DPA transaction. So please do not discuss it with him and say that you're doing DPA. He cannot know about it. Otherwise, he has to reveal that information directly to his lenders. It is his legal obligation to do so. So please do not start the conversation with, I'm going to be using DPA, although I know you're not supposed to know about that. I'm telling you this anyway. Do not tell him that, because he has to reveal that information directly to his lender. So please do not screw it up and tell him that when you know damn well he's not supposed to know about it, okay? So this is essentially how you use the 60-30-10, which is the latest and greatest loan program that's available for creative financing. This is Monica Main signing off, and I'll see you at the top.